Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for our webinar, Managing Conflict for 3 Types of Teams. My name is Caitlin, and I'm a marketing manager at the Myers-Briggs company, and I am so excited to show you this content today. So before we get started, just a couple of housekeeping items. We are recording this webinar, so we will be sending that out in the next few days, so no need to worry about that. We will also be including the slides with the recording, and we encourage questions. We want to hear from you, feedback and engagement, comments, all of that. So what would be great is if right now you could just navigate over to the questions box just to make sure we can all find it. Go ahead and say hi, tell us where you're from really quick, and we'll just make sure that that is easy for people to navigate. And while you're doing that, just to mention, you can submit questions anytime during the webinar. We will be doing a question and answer at the end, but if you have questions as our presenter is going through things, you can feel free to submit them. So perfect. I'm seeing responses coming in, people telling us where they're from, which is great. Lots from the East Coast, actually, which is kind of surprising. So that's great. I'm in California, so hello, good afternoon, good morning, both of those. Awesome. Okay, great. So now I'll go ahead and introduce our speaker for today. So Gail is a great speaker. She has done a couple of webinars with us in the last month, which some of you may have seen. So Gail is one of the co-authors of the new TKI Team Report, and she does coaching and workshops with teams at all levels, nationally and internationally, and has published more than 60 articles, chapters, and technical reports. She's a wealth of knowledge, so I'm very excited. And Gail, I will hand it over to you.
Great, thanks, Caitlin. And welcome, everyone. I am so excited to talk to all of you today. Really, I've been thinking a lot about this lately, teams in conflict, and I'm just really eager to share my ideas and eager to hear your ideas too. I'm going to flip my camera off now, and there we go. And then start with the first slide I have here, which is about, the purpose of this third webinar is really to talk about the new TKI Team Report and how it can be used for different types of teams through different parts of their life cycle. For those of you, I think there's several maybe who attended webinars 1 and 2, I covered more of the basics. Ralph and Ken were with me on the first one. Then I talked about how to run a workshop with one of these. And then you can find those if you want on the Myers-Briggs website, along with sample reports and the free facilitators guide. So the websites, as Caitlin mentioned, are there along with the slides. So I'm not going to cover much of that material this time. I'm really going to build on that. And I think probably most of the people here are experienced with the TKI, and probably with teams is what we found out in the first 2 webinars. So I'm guessing that's probably true here too. So we're going to really talk about how to use this TKI report for various types of teams. Just as a quick reminder, because this is probably the most common question that has come up so far, is that the TKI Team Report does not, NOT, replace the individual report and interpretive instrument. So this is specifically, you'll use that one as you've always used it before with individuals, dyads, maybe for coaching. There's a number of different ways you've already been using it. But this new report was specifically designed for groups or teams who are interacting with one another around a common goal. So that's quite different, and you'll see illustrations for these types of teams I'm going to talk about today, things you'll see in the team report. And just again, as a reminder, it's only for use for personal and professional development. It is not to be used for recruitment strategies, for selection purposes, or promotion decisions. So just kind of reminder on that. Okay, so moving ahead. Go. So first I'm going to kind of put this quote up here. This is from Sadal Neely's new book on the remote work revolution. And some of you may know she's a faculty member at the Harvard Business School. Many of you may have read her book. I thought it was very informative. I liked it. And the comment she makes at the beginning of the book is the importance of disagreement for refining ideas, identifying mistakes, and growing a collective unit. I'll argue that it's not just good for remote teams, it's good for all teams. And those of you, again, who've been doing this kind of work know that conflict will occur in practically all teams. I've never been in one where there's not been conflict, which basically, is just differences. But it's the essential part is how you manage that conflict. And that is going to determine your team's success or the team's failure. So really, we do want certain kinds of conflict, other kinds we don't. I'm going to talk about that in a minute as a way of managing high-performing teams. So this is my agenda for today. I'm going to share with you this framework I created about teams in conflict, kind of give us an overview and big picture about the different types of teams and different modalities. And then I've got three short cases I'm going to discuss, which is new teams, struggling teams, and hybrid teams. And then towards the end, I want to do my best. I will try to do this to make sure we have time for questions and answers. So I asked this last time and it really was helpful, so I'm going to do this again. I want you to think about, I've kind of talked about in general what I'm going to cover, but I'm really interested in hearing what your expectations are for today. I'm sure you all were motivated in some way to tune in, and there may be something you're hoping to learn or something you want to take away from the webinar. So I'm going to give you a minute or so to kind of think about that, and if you would drop something in the question box, it would really help me because it might cause me to add a couple of comments as I go along, or and if somehow we can't get to it, well, Caitlin will try to respond. So, okay, I see lots of comments. Learning how to use the TKI to help teams develop. Okay, that's good. I'm going to cover that today. Refine ideas on how teams address conflict. Someone's saying they're excited to use the new tool to use with teams that they're working with now, so that's great. More on the team report and refine ideas, okay. Want to be equipped. Oh, they're coming in pretty quickly now. Learning how to integrate several new team members into long existing teams, okay. Practical ideas on how to help teams with conflict. Describe the benefit to conflict clients about the report. Oh, these are great. Thank you so much. This is super helpful. So I think in one way or another, I'm going to be covering those. If for some reason you think I haven't covered in enough detail, especially towards the end, be sure to drop comments in the question box because Caitlin and I go through all of these and try to respond to as many as we possibly can. Okay. So I'm going to move on, but keep adding things. I love it when you all put things in the discussion box. So I really want to feel like I've got an audience out there and I really want to know what you're thinking. So more is better. I love to have comments in the question box. So questions or just something you're thinking about would be fantastic. Okay, so moving to the next slide here. So this is my framework and I am going to hang on this slide for just a little bit as I kind of explain this overall framework for thinking about teams in conflict. So what I did was created a kind of a 3x3 matrix here, and across the top you can see is the team life cycle. And what I chose to use, there were a number of different ways I could have looked at this continuum, but I chose to go just kind of beginning, middle, and end point. And like I said, it is a continuum, so there's many, many places along this continuum where a team might be, but for the ease of conceptualizing what we're talking about today, I chose the beginning or launch of the team, the midpoint of the team, and then when the team finishes its work. And so, and there are clear times in which conflict, predictable times that conflict happens. The research tells us there's been a great deal, the research I really like reading is about longitudinal team, or when they do the research methodology of using longitudinal data to look at the trajectory of conflict in teams on both successful teams and on teams that fail. And there's clear differences in how conflict appears and how it's dealt with along this team life cycle. So my comments today kind of build on that research. And as Caitlin mentioned, I've had probably 20 or 30 years of team development experience at all different levels and organizations and all different continents. And so I draw on that experience as well as the research I've conducted, the research I read, and my personal experience. So this comes from all of that. And then on the left-hand side are the modalities. Face-to-face on one end of the continuum where we're co-located and in close proximity to one another. And then the other end of the continuum is fully remote. And then someplace in between is the hybrid. And as we know, there's very many different variations on this theme. We have individuals who may be working, like my daughter, she works 3 days in the office and 2 days from home. Some places people only work remote, and some on the same organization, some people are only co-located. So just about every variation you could see on that theme is happening in organizations around the world. So we're going to look at this continuum. Research shows, lots of research also on these different modalities. And from the research I've done and other presentations I've done, even though we've had remote for a long time, since the pandemic, if you go back to 2019, and there's been a great deal of research now on how organizations are functioning in today's kind of post-COVID world. And I would argue it's quite different than the way we were remote before. And so it's good to kind of keep up on the literature and how these different modalities are really affecting teams' success or failure. So I will talk a little bit about that today as we go along. So like I said, this is very evidence-based and also based on personal experience that I have. We know that in the team's life cycle, again, like I said, there are specific ways that teams are very successful, but we also see variations on that team. So we could start out with a team that's really headed in a good direction, but then somehow gets derailed and starts going not so good direction and ends up failing, or maybe even there is no team anymore. We also see teams that maybe start out not so well, but they're able to realign themselves and to end up in a successful place. So many variations on that theme too. So that's the framework. Just because of the amount of time we have today, which is relatively short, I'm going to focus on 4 different things that would fit in all of these boxes basically, is the team, purpose and goals, the type of conflict I'm going to share with you in just a minute, obviously the TKI conflict modes or conflict handling modes and how people deal with conflict. That's obviously important, and then some specific interventions. And I can see I'm tracking as best I can comments that are coming through on the question box, and someone's asking about sharing research resources. So at the end of the slide deck, I have think about 5 articles that are key articles that cover this research on team life cycle and on different modalities. So I've got a couple others in there that are kind of my favorite. So yes, I do have those. And if there's anything specifically you want, I'm happy to share that with you. I love digging in the research. So, but there are some there that will get you started and give you, and some are very academic articles, a couple are more practitioner articles. Okay, and then today I'm going, as I talked about, I've got 3 cases I'm going to show you. So the first one really falls in this box here, which is they're at their beginning. It's a brand new team, and they happen to be fully remote. The second team I'm going to talk about is a face-to-face co-located team, and it is about midpoint in their team life cycle. And the third one is a hybrid team, and they also happen to be about midpoint in their life cycle. So we'll get kind of illustrations for these. What I hope and what I like about this framework is you could probably take just about any team. I can't imagine there's going to be anything that's outside of these boxes. So there'll be someplace along this continuum, someplace in these modalities, and then based on kind of the more conceptual and specific applications I show you today, you should be able to address just about anything, any team, any modality. It's going to give you a master framework for thinking about that. Okay, so I did mention the 3 types of conflict. Again, those of you who are doing much work in conflict are probably familiar with this. This is pretty standard in the literature now, about everywhere. There's often many other types of conflict mentioned, but the 3 that I think are mentioned the most frequently are these 3. So we're going to use these today. And the first one is, well, there's process conflict, relationship conflict, and task conflict. So process conflict, for those of you who may not be familiar with it, is how. That's how the work gets accomplished. So examples of that is, how are we going to make decisions? How often are we going to meet? If it's remote work, what technology are we going to use? All those kinds of things that become important in knowing how we're going to work together. Relationship conflict are disagreements or personality clashes between team members, and those often result in tensions and resentments. Examples of those are just two people who don't like each other for whatever personality reasons. Differences in values, and I was thinking about one. I just got back from Africa, so it was really interesting looking at the differences in people's value around punctuality. Obviously, as Americans, I think we're much more, obsessed with punctuality, and obviously it's very variable based on the person. But other cultures and just other people, right, punctuality is not as important, so that can really cause some relationship conflicts. Task conflict, those are differences of the substantive type around the particular task or content issues. And I was thinking, again, just my own experience with teams, is we can have really different opinions about what's the problem we're trying to solve. And I find it really interesting in working with teams and having taught in graduate school, is that often we'll find out that everyone thinks they knew what the problem was, but we never discussed it, or they never discussed it in the beginning, and you get to the end and realize different people were solving different problems, but they never ever had a conversation about the problem identification. So that can be important. Different perspectives on solutions. Many times, especially today, teams or organizations are developing teams who purposefully have different perspectives. They can be cross-functional, they could be all kinds of diversity of thought, all kinds of diversity. So we want those different perspectives. That's why we design the team that way. So we need to figure out how to best harvest all those good ideas. And then real quickly, again, from the research, and I did list, and this one's in the back, Karen Jen is really well known for her work on these different types of conflict, and Mannix too. And so high-performing teams, we know, will deal directly with process issues, often at the very beginning or launch of their team. And they will revisit and discuss that throughout the whole life cycle of the team. Relationship conflict, for the most part, you want to stay clear of that, but it might mean addressing that, trying to figure out why those issues are arising. Sometimes it can be because of lack of clarification of roles and responsibilities. Sometimes that will help. And then keeping people focused on the task and not on personal attributes, that is really where relationship conflict pops up. So, and I have actually a reference at the back of the slides of an article I really like that talks about dealing with relationship conflict. So we won't have time to talk about that today, but it's I think an outstanding article, and I'll touch on that a little bit when we finish up here. So the task conflict, so we do want a certain amount of task conflict, and successful teams by and large manage that task conflict throughout the life cycle. We often see it used well in that mid zone of the life cycle of the team. But what we might have to do is even force it a little bit by providing structure for how we're going to get input from others, particularly more introverted or people who don't feel comfortable, and to be able to do analysis of those different viewpoints. So I've done this a lot on committees that I'm on, and trying to structure that a little bit better. There are many, many different strategies for working on this. I wrote through a few in here, the devil's advocate, or do an analysis on pro-con on different ideas. So again, many, many different ways that we can deal with that. So this is the research. We want kind of a minimal amount of process, but because we're going to mitigate it and talk about it, relationship conflict, we're going to try to stay clear of, or at least address it. And then we do want to promote a certain amount of task conflict in order to get a successful result. And that is pretty standard in the literature on research on teams. Okay, so the next one is, as I talked about before, so purpose of the team is important, the types of conflict, and then of course the TKI conflict handling modes. And again, I'm not going to really spend much time on this. But I'll show illustrations when we do the cases. So probably most of you know that of the 5 modes, number 1 is all are important. So, but we want to be careful about overusing and underusing. And what this slide illustrates is there are certain times when some modes are more useful than others. So the print's a little bit small here, but this is in the TKI Team Report. It's in the individual report. So those of you who have been working with this probably have this almost memorized. So there are certain times when we want to compete. There are certain times we want to collaborate, et cetera, et cetera. So that is what I might call the ideal use of the 5 conflict handling modes. And again, it's a dynamic of a number of people who have different preferences. And so how do we work together towards the mode that might be most useful at a particular time across this team? And it's going to be different throughout that whole trajectory of the team development is when you want to be able to use these. So it's important to know the when, to be able to assess how are we doing it right now and what kind of adjustments do we need to make. So that's kind of the next slide here. This is the actual team. I'm going to show you illustrations in a minute on these cases, but in the TKI Team Report, for those of you who maybe have used it or looked at the sample already, you know that what you get in the team report are, and this one's for 12 people, how many people scored high or possible overuse, medium category, and low, still based on the percentiles that you have on those 30 questions, the AB questions. And so now we start to see what's the pattern of the actual team, and then look at that against what kind of conflict mode style or what we'll be using for the team based on where we are right now. So that helps us kind of identify strengths and potential weaknesses for this team, and to talk about where we need to be and how to make sure this team doesn't derail. Okay, and so I'm going to, that kind of gives you the framework, and that overall framework then is going to provide the context for the 3 specific cases that I'm going to share with you now. So the first one is this new team that I mentioned before. So here are the, here's the scenario. Quickly, I just tried to do a real short version. Someone asked real quick, when I refer to life cycle, is it the team cycle or the conflict cycle? It is, I'm really talking about the project cycle that goes across. I chose not to, I won't get into a lot of detail, but I'm sure you're all familiar with the forming, norming, storming. I chose not to use that because I didn't want to do team development per se because of how flexible teams are now. So many people are on so many different teams. You have people coming and going. And so I chose to use kind of the project lifestyle rather than the team development lifestyle. But there is a kind of a conflict cycle too that correlates with that project lifestyle cycle. And let me talk, I didn't mention that, so let me go back for a second. Let me show you what some of the research shows about some of the conflict. That was a good question, actually. So we know that at the midpoint, longitudinal research shows us that there will be a spike in conflict at the midpoint. It's some really interesting work that Connie Gersick did. Some of you may have read some of that, called, it's all related to time. And so at the midpoint, we're starting to realize, oh, wow, we're halfway there. Have we really, met our milestones? And so there's some scurrying around perhaps that happens at the midpoint. And so we see spikes, even in successful teams. Again, it's how you deal with it that makes it important. And then we also see spikes right before the end point. So as people are trying to wrap it up and maybe document, get ready for the presentations, we see another spike of conflict right towards the end. So these are fairly predictable, even, this is for successful teams. And so being able to anticipate those and mitigate those risks is really important. So thank you so much for that comment. And so we know a lot from the research that's out there. Some of the more interesting research that I've been involved with and have been reading about is using social network analysis. So how do we look at the network and the patterns of the people who are on the teams and be able to address those and the relationships people have among each other. So back to the case, this is a newly formed team, the new team. It's 12 high-performing employees who work remotely, and they've been at, this is actually based on a real team I know about, and they were brought together to develop a new remote work policy. There's going to be some, the company has decided to transition to part of the workforce to remote, and they want to make sure they have some policies. So senior management is already anticipating that employees will have strong opinions about this new policy, so they want to make sure they put together some experienced people who are good at working on a team. And so these people have been carefully selected to make sure they represent all the major departments. Some of them know each other somewhat, but they have never ever worked together before. So this is the first time new team. Okay. And what I thought I'd do, this is my little bit of an interaction here that I thought I'd get some of you maybe to help respond. So I think a lot of times, in fact, I know I hear this a lot, people don't think you would use the TKI report or whatever until a problem crops up and, oh, we've got conflict, what should we do about it? But I think it's really important that new teams, before they even get started, would use the TKI Team Report to think about teams. So if you could maybe drop some comments or thoughts in the discussion box about why you think it might be important for a new team, brand new team, to talk about conflict and conflict management. So there's not a problem, there's not an issue right now, but we're going to kick off the team and we're going to do the TKI Team Report. We might even pair it with an MBTI or an EQI or other kinds of things. And so I'm seeing some people starting to drop some things in. So one is to establish ground rules for the team. Outstanding. That's perfect. We know that high-performing teams do a pretty good job of establishing that to help accelerate the forming to storming stage. Yep. Easier to talk about it than when they're not in the midst. These are great. Yeah, excellent. To get out of conflict styles, so you're not blindsided by others, that there's no hair on fire. There's some really great comments in here. I can't read them fast enough, but these are great. This is exactly what I was thinking about. So as I said before, high-performing teams, they start talking about this at the launch. They do not wait until they have an issue. So they want people to be able to have a language around conflict handling. And of course, it's best if you actually know more about your teammates. So if you have, if you know more about what people's particular preferences are, where you may have some issues you need to be monitoring, that gives you a heads up before it becomes an issue. So it's a really good, and we know that high-performing teams have these discussions about how they work together throughout their team life cycle. That's one thing that really characterizes a high-performing team. And then someone's mentioned here, so if you've got this language, you're going to be more aware of process, relationship, and task conflict, which ones are better, which ones we want to try to stay away from, but still we want to address those, but we don't want to have those become part of a dysfunction and derail us. And somebody said, yeah, get folks to become aware of their team style. So how, what's our mix? What do we look like? And then individually, what's my contribution and what are some ways that I might cause some problems for the team? So it's both for self-reflection and for understanding the team dynamics. Okay, great. Then next question. So if you wanted to create a high-performing team, we're going to say it's a brand new team, we want it really to work well together. Based on what you all know, again, I know a lot of you are very experienced, which conflict modes are going to be most useful for this team throughout their life cycle? So what's the answer to that? So again, if you'll drop, somebody says collaboration. That's good. All of them, yep. Anybody want to add anything else? All of them, yep. That will depend on the situation. Okay, you got it. That's great. So remember, all modes are useful. So, the idea is that everyone has access to those 5 modes. They're self-aware. They know when to foreground and when to background. And what is a little bit more complex, but I think more interesting, is now we have a team dynamic. So we have many people who have different preferences, and so how we work together. And then we can all, what I like about those that you said depend on the situation and maybe mentions collaboration or maybe even compromise, is this is a very interdependent team based on the scenario. We know this is probably going to be high stakes. This policy is going to be important. And so we do, and they purposely have chosen people from different departments. So we want their good ideas. We want to be able to work together and have everyone in the organization kind of buy into this policy and have it work basically. So collaboration and maybe even compromise will be important at different times in this team. So yeah, so the answer is kind of all of them, and the certain one's going to be more important depending on the situation and where they are. So outstanding, excellent answers, everybody. Next slide is this actual team. So I'm showing you again their profile. And as I said before, we can actually look at strengths and maybe possible weaknesses. And again, remember, this team has not worked together, so they're just kind of getting to know each other. So what's nice about this team, and in some ways maybe no surprise, because they have been handpicked. Senior leadership knows these people work well in teams. So no surprise, we have people who are extremely high in collaborating and very high in compromising. So that skill set probably looks like it's pretty good with this team. The one thing, a little yellow flag we'll have to be careful is, are we collaborating and compromising at the right times depending on the situation? And we want to make sure we don't overuse these modes, because that can also be detrimental. So we're going to do that. And then another is just to keep our eye on, obviously not a problem now, but we do have two individuals who seem to be in possible overuse of competing. I always think of these just like, EQI or MBTI or whatever. These are resources that you have available among your team members. And so we want to rely on these resources, but also just kind of watch for times that it might cause some challenges for the team. So these two competing people, probably very assertive and can be very helpful. Yeah, someone said that we could use them for devil's advocate. That's great. Good. And but we want to be careful that it doesn't cause any problems. And we'll see in a later example of a different team how that becomes problematic. So we have that. So I showed you those high ones we have there and those two. So just kind of keep that in mind. And then this also in the team, TKI Team Report, we have the boxes that I just showed you with the numbers, and then you also get a graph here that shows the percentages of people that may be overusing or underusing. So just like we saw, we've got people who are very high on compromising and collaborating, and then we also have probably the highest percentage of people are in avoiding. So that's important. So what happens is this team gets together, they get this information, and at the team launch, they know how important it is that we're all clear on the team goals. So they've had a good discussion about that to make sure they're all headed in the same direction. They know about conflict now because they had this training session, and which conflict modes might be most ideal for which parts of the project they're working on. One thing I thought might be critical here, and you've probably done the same thing, I know I've done it in working with teams, is about when to collaborate and when to compromise. So that would be important for this team. Also, just kind of note when to use and maybe the risk of the competing mode for this team. So it gives us lots to talk about. And then in the team report, there's also a bunch of challenges and remedies that are listed that are specific behaviors. People really seem to like this. So for this is about a high compromising, that their highest score is compromising. So what might they be doing that doesn't allow them to collaborate as much as maybe they should? So there are a number of different suggestions, behaviors for thinking about compromising and collaborating. And they're both for interpersonal relationships and for decision making. Next is, and you'll find this in the TKI Team Report Facilitators Guide, we have some templates for SMART goals. So this team would want to identify maybe a couple of priority actions. In this particular case, because this team is more developed and more mature as far as the individuals, the team itself isn't, but the people are. They've decided they really want to have regular discussions about their current situation and how they're going to manage conflict. And then they also, what would be ideal is, as these people learn this skill and this ability to diagnose and discuss it, is they're going to have to keep going back out there to departments because they're kind of, the small group is the task force, but they're going to be leading this effort for the whole organization. So they have to be shuttling back and forth into the departments to maybe get input and to share with them what's happening in this task force. so they could use those conflict handling skills, in their department. So it's a way that could make this extremely useful for these members. So it really provides a really nice way for professional and personal development for these team members. Next, I'm going to look at the struggling teams. And this team is a 13-member co-located team. Remember I said this is the face-to-face team. And this team has been working together for about 6 months. For the first 6 months, it's a year-long project, so we're going to say they're about midpoint of this project. So we can expect something might be going on. The beginning of the team, they seemed they were on schedule, they were working well together, but for whatever reason, 2 people have really started to, there's been some dysfunctional relationships between these 2 people, and it's starting to bleed over into the meetings, the team meetings, and it's really threatening to derail the whole team. So several people have become disengaged. The team is starting to miss their deadlines. And it turns out in this particular scenario, for professional development purposes, they put a team leader in there to give her some experience in leading a team, and she has limited experience as a team leader. So that's not really helping a lot either. So anyway, we've got a team that it could easily derail here, and we've really got to get this team back on track. Okay. So there's a question, I'm going to pass this. That's a great question that we have about, is the relationship core or symptomatic? And that's actually something you want to dig into to see if you can figure out, like, obviously the 5 whys. Why? So what is at the core of that relationship problem? Next, this is for teams who have been working together for a certain period of time. And it is in the TKI Team Report Facilitator Guide. It's in the back. It's an optional team diagnostic worksheet. It's adapted from research that I did on teamwork before I started doing this work here with the Myers-Briggs company. And it is a short, I think it's 13 questions that tells you about the team. So if you have an existing team, if you're a facilitator going in, generally what I would do is I do interviews with the team leader. Depending on the situation, I might do interviews with senior leaders in the organization. And then I may or may not do actually some interviews with some of the key team members. But this instrument can be anonymous, and it's free, actually. It's in the Facilitator's Guide. Someone's asking if you can purchase it. It's in the Facilitator's Guide in the back. You just, pull it out and have the teams complete it. You can see they've even fixed it. So you've got the little buttons here about how frequently or, how often did these things occur, of them knowing what their shared goals are they experiencing stress, those kinds of things. So it's based on research that we know about high-performing and low-performing teams. So you can gather this data. Again, I would make it all anonymous. And then I feed this back, and this in relationship to provide context with the TKI team profiles. I've been using this for years, and it is extremely valuable and gives the team some real indication about how they're doing. And so for this particular team, the hypothetical team, I have what I found out from them filling out their diagnostic sheet is that they really do have strong purpose and goals, which that's good. They have a high level of independence. It means they really have to be working closely together to make it work. So while that's important, it also is what sometimes creates more conflict because of that independence. And then what we found out are some of the problems, which were kind of clear, but now we can share it in data. I like to do this in data rather than just have people yell out what they think their opinion is. So if I can stay close to data, it really helps me have more rational and clear conversations with teams who might be struggling. So this team is really high on process conflict, which is not helpful for this team. It's very high on relationship conflict. And we know from the interviews and from information I've gotten from the team and the team leader that there's a great deal of stress that has been created in this team due to the relationship conflict with these 2 people. And there are limited conflict handling skills, both with the leader and with the team member. So lots to work on here. This is the team's conflict handling profile for the struggling team. So what we do know is that the two people who are have this relationship conflict happen to be the two people who are the high competing people. So maybe no surprise that that has happened. 5 of the 13 people have, are avoiding, so that's a large number of avoiding. Although we also do have 5 people who are low preference for avoiding. And it turns out, I'll show you in a minute, the leader is high on avoiding and high on accommodating. So we're starting to see the profile of what might be going on in the dynamics of this team. And several people mentioned that I talked to said, we really need a stronger leader because these 2 members have kind of gotten out of control, and she's not reining them in at all. Nothing's happening in order to kind of stop the dysfunction that's going on. So, and this again is the same, the percentages, what I've showed you with the numbers. So with all that information, the team decides to talk, or the facilitator has them talk about the pros and the cons of avoiding, both overuse and underuse of that and what might be the consequences. They identified from that diagnostic tool that there are team norms that are not working for this team now. So we really need to think about how do we shift to some more functional norms that's going to help this team operate more. Again, I've worked with a lot of these types of teams, so I know, from what I'm talking about. We want to create more. So one idea that came up is to create more productive structure for the team meeting. So until now, there hasn't been any agendas, and there's been no requirement for input from the members of the team. So putting a little bit more structure so that there is more contribution would be helpful. And then also realizing that there are not a lot of, there's a lot of people in the medium range for collaborating, but we're going to use some of these people who have strong collaboration skills, kind of build the collaboration and focus on task away from personality differences. So we've got some work to do, but probably like you, I've done work like this and I've seen a lot of turnarounds. But again, it really helps when you have data to be able to show that. I'm going to keep moving here. This is also in the TKI Team Report Facilitators Report, and it shows the people's names with all of for each one of the modes, if they're high, medium, or low. This, I think, is just a wonderful addition with the team report. I used to do this all by hand. Now it just pops out automatically. So it's great for the facilitator. You could share it with the team, but I want to caution you to be careful with how you use this. Number one, I would want permission from all the team members before I would share this with anybody. And even if I have permission and we share it, which could be beneficial, you want to use it with care, because as we can see, this team probably may have some sensitivities. And so you want to have some experience knowing what you're doing if you were to share this with the team, if they were all good with it. But this is another feature of the TKI team report. Again, it only shows up in the facilitator's guide. It does not show up in each member's report. And by the way, this is the top person is the team leader, high on avoiding and accommodating. Okay, and then this is in the team report. So in addition to getting their team profile, they also get their individual profile. This is for the leader, again, as I showed you, and then she can compare her highest and lowest mode with that of the team. So it gives her some particular kinds of things that she can see the contributions she's making. In this particular case, it was decided that she would get some coaching. And so this is a really good way for her to do some introspection, reflection, build some new skills to be able to help turn this team around. And someone asked real quick about the high, medium, low calculation. Those are just like the regular TKI report, right? So when you answer those 30 ABs, you get the percentiles, and then those percentiles, just like it is here, you can see this looks like the typical TKI. And then if you're high, medium, or low, that's what we show in this report here. So just use the basics of the TKI, but we've just built on it for this team application. Same thing here, individuals will get suggestions for challenges and remedies they might be having. So that's helpful for the individual. So a lot of it's going to be, self-reflection and self-management around these conflict modes. And then last, kind of heading down the end of the straight here, is the hybrid team. So this one real quickly is a 5-member team that's working remotely 3 days, 2 days at work. They are approaching the midpoint in their project, and they have a major presentation due to senior leadership in 2 weeks. So stress is starting to mount. They're not quite where they want to be. They're worried that, are they really going to look good to senior management? Are they doing what they all need to do? And the leader, is really savvy about conflict in teams, and she knows because they're at the midpoint and because of this stress, there may actually be more process and relationship conflict that might arise. And there's a certain amount of task conflict she wants to structure to help them get through this period. And so what she decides to do is to have a team training that is more kind of a development. So somebody asked about that earlier, or what they were interested in is how to develop. So this team has actually been doing pretty well, but we know based on research there could be a little spike here. So let's make sure that we give the team some extra skills and extra self-awareness about this so that they can, work more smoothly through this midpoint. So that's how they could be doing that. Okay, and then let's see. So this is kind of what we know. I just based on, this is actually from Sadal's research that she did in her book about what we know about hybrid. I'm probably not going to go through all of these, but we know that hybrid work is different. It's not the same as face-to-face. And, I was reminded as I was working on this, I was one of the first persons at our university to do distance learning. And the people who did not do well on distance learning just treated distance learning the same as they did their face-to-face teaching, and that did not work as well. And so really appreciating what that means to be remote is quintessential in rethinking your processes and your tools and all those kinds of things to get engagement and to be successful. So, and we know again from the research that it's team leaders who are purposeful about this that really make the difference in success and failure. So, there's information there that can help you, and again, a reference. And then the other is, again, not spending a lot of time because I want to get to some questions here. These, as I mentioned before, I'm going to go back to those types of conflict: process, relationship, and task. And again, research and my own personal experience tells me that there are different considerations for virtual work. So time zones, we could have global. I've worked on teams before that were global, so that really impacts when we're going to be available. You'll probably have to negotiate work hours, the collaborative tools that you're going to use. Relationship, we know that psychological and team cohesion, which is psychological trust and team cohesion, is essential for successful teams, and it's just harder to develop virtually. And then task, well, again, we want to adjust our processes so that we can elicit really good ideas and then work those into our solution. So this team we found was high on accommodating and avoiding, low on competing. They got along well, but we also learned from, they did the diagnostic tool that some team members are feeling isolated because of the remote work. And this happens frequently too. I've seen this, that many members felt like they hadn't been included or gotten input in team decisions. And we know that the team leader in this case was strong and sometimes went and made decisions without keeping all the members in the loop just because it would seem easy or they were remote. So this team then has decided what they want to do is involve more team leaders. Both the leader and the members want to be more involved in the decision-making process. They're going to discuss that and talk about decision processes. And they also figure out this might be a way for personal and professional development for all team members to develop those decision-making skills. And this intervention, we're hoping, will steer people more away from the avoiding and accommodating. Not that, we want to use those two at the proper time, but maybe build some skills in advocating and obviously in collaborating and compromising. And they've decided they're going to continue to work on this as for their team development and come back in 6 months from now and check their progress and build on those accomplishments. So these are the, just real quick, some of the related resources that I mentioned earlier. So those might be helpful for you. And then what I'd like to do is have Caitlin help me and move to the question and answer. See what, I know I've covered a lot of material, but again, you're going to get copies of the webinar here, as well as the slides. So, and then if you go back to, there actually are in the facilitator guide, there are 2 cases that are some, I adapted them some for today's webinar, but there are 2 case examples in the facilitator's guide that will go into much more detail than I've talked about today. So, Caitlin, over to you.
Yeah, great. So definitely keep submitting those questions. We do have a few to go over right now, but take your time, submit them now. If we aren't able to get to all of the questions, we will follow up via email. So the first question that I have marked down is, how successful can you be by coaching a team remotely?
That is so funny. That's the one I was just looking at, Caitlin. I like that one. So I've done this. So one is you can coach the team if you have, you know, I think particularly like that struggling team, what I find are a lot of times team members ask me for individual coaching sessions. And so I might do some offline coaching for individuals. So you can do some for coaching. What I have a colleague and I, we do a lot of this kind of work. So we will observe and we'll provide feedback for the group and tools. So one thing we learned, I didn't mention, but there are a lot of really good associated skills that go along with this. So one of it is giving and receiving feedback. So we will teach the whole team on how to give and receive feedback about conflict. So that, again, based on data and things that we have, how we do that. And then, like I said, individual coaching sessions for those who feel like they want to either develop it, or we have some people who may be causing some issues for the team. And so they may get some individual coaching sessions for that. So yes, I think coaching either for the team or for individuals is something that works really well. Again, if anybody out there, what I've told Caitlin I'd like to do is I'd love to get a group of experienced people together and have a discussion about this, because I know I have one way I do it, but many people, I learned from a lot of other experienced people. I'm guessing we could have a wonderful back and forth conversation if we could do that. So yeah, so that would be good. Let's see. What was the second one? Was there another one, Caitlin?
Mm-hmm. Yes, there is. Okay, so how do you caution people against weaponizing the profile? For example, if you weren't so avoidant, we could work through this.
Oh, yeah. So that's definitely, that becomes a relationship kind of attributes, right? So we want to just talk about one of the, I'll tell you a quick example, I think, is, you know, there is a tendency for people to automatically think that avoiding is bad. And the other thing I try to caution people about is we do not call people, I do not use the language like you're an avoider or you're a competitor or you're a whatever. It's not you, it's a behavior that you may have preferences for. So part of all this conflict, you know, the TKI and everything is to help you identify these 5 different conflict handling modes, to realize that they're a choice and that you want to have access to all of those and that all are useful. So real quickly, the example I have is that competing people, usually the ones who use competing, will often think that's the best style. And we go through an exercise that talk about what are the advantages and disadvantages of competing. And then also we go through, have discussions about the advantages and disadvantages of avoiding. And as probably most of you know, there's some wonderful advantages at the right time, at the right place to avoid. And it's not uncommon that I'll have people who are strong competitors, you know, maybe 99, 100 percentile, who come up later after that discussion and say, wow, you know, I hadn't really thought through all these disadvantages of competing. I really need to kind of ratchet back on that a little bit. And I can actually see the advantages of avoiding sometimes. So I've really learned from other people, you know, who are using these different modes. So we want to really think about it as a choice of behavior and get away from labeling people and see where those strengths. And remember, like I said, all of these modes are resources to the team. So we just want to make sure that we are harvesting those resources and then paying attention for places where we may be overusing or underusing. Okay, next.
Great. So the next question, how long would a team need to work together to use the team diagnostic worksheet?
Oh, so for the team diagnostic worksheet, what you want to have is the team, and again, it's going to be, and all depends probably, but they have to have worked together enough because they're going to answer questions about their interactions with each other. So if they have not worked with each other enough to be able to answer those questions, then that diagnosis is probably not going to be so helpful. So you just kind of have to gauge where you think they've worked together enough to be able to do it. And that once again, maybe the same thing with the TKI Team Report, where we may want to repeat it. So the team development work I did, we'll want to wait a little while until they've had time to work together, and then we'll get that. And then the team will set some goals for themselves. And then we will repeat that diagnostic maybe, 3 months, 9 months down the road to see if some things have changed. So it's a good way to kind of reassess, how are we doing? Same thing with the TKI Team Report. Again, I would recommend you do it at the beginning if you can, but obviously sometimes it's already been in session. And then should you redo it at some point? So maybe if you do a relaunch or reset for the team, you might want to redo it. If you have a lot of new team members who have joined the team, you might want to redo the TKI Team Report. I was thinking about another one, a specific person I was working with. She was really, really wanting to do some work on her conflict handling. She was high competing and knew that it wasn't serving her well. And so she did some concerted coaching and effort around that. And so she took the TKI individual report just for her to see if she felt like some of those interventions were working for her. So you could actually use a combo of the TKI Team Report, the individual report, and that team diagnostic in a way for team development. So I've used all of those in those different ways. So again, thinking just about tools and about that trajectory of the team and the different modalities. Okay?
Great. Okay, so we have a couple more. This one is I'm going to kind of make some assumptions about what the actual question is, but how do you determine when to interview the leader only versus all or part of the team?
Yeah, so that will be, again, depending on the client that we've engaged with. I recently worked with an organization, and it was the senior leader who came to us to say that there were some issues in a particular department. And so for that one, which we know was critical, and we were going to do multiple conflict sessions with many people in that organization. And so to better understand what the issues were to really help them, we interviewed the whole senior leadership team, and they were all on board and eager to do this because truthfully, we want the senior leadership to know what we're doing so that they know what to expect, and that ideally they actually, have taken the instrument and they understand how this all works, right? Because it's not just that they need to do that. And then the senior leader needs to support that in some ways. And then we did the department heads, and then we did selected for us at random members throughout the department. And so my colleague and I had really good sense of what those challenges the team were facing so that we could use the TKI. And then we actually ended up doing like a week-long session with them around, like I said, feedback and setting goals, alignment, the conflict. We did EQI. So it was ways to really try to build some strength in that team. So yeah, number of different ways you can do that. See, I see someone asking if my work is mostly remote or in person, and it's everything, especially now. So some work I do in person, still do that. In fact, like I said, I just got back from Africa. I was doing collaboration with 4 different nations in Western Africa, and they wanted to fly me over there to work. And that one would have been hard, maybe remote, because they spoke, part of them spoke Arabic, part of them spoke French. We had 6 interpreters who were there, and we worked with them for 2 days on building collaborative strategies for some of the issues they were facing. So that was an example of me going someplace and working with them. But I've done a lot of remote work, and because that's just the way kind of things are right now. So yeah, so I think I have, on that whole continuum, I've done, pretty much, evenly maybe distributed. I don't know. Let's see what else.
So I think we have time for one more question, which I'm just going to go ahead and say I know there's a bunch of other questions here, so we will be getting back to a bunch of people via email. But for the last question, how do diagnostic results differ from assessment results?
Okay, so let's see. So what I'm calling assessment results would be the TKI team profile and the different charts that you see around that. And the team diagnostic worksheet is that kind of additional appendix that is, and by the way, it's not copywritten. You could actually put it in a more electronic form if you wanted to. I think the way it works now is you can actually use those dots, but if you want to, I know we used it recently, and they put it in SPSS, I believe, or SurveyMonkey. So there are a number of ways. If it looks like people start using that a lot, maybe there'll be some more, development of that. But for now, it's fairly easy to use. But you will have to drop it into something if you want to automate, to get the scores and create some little tables, because I show that then to the team. But anyway, those work in parallel with each other. So diagnostic for teams who've actually been working together for a while, and the assessment goes along with it. So it just gives you some context, as well as interviews or those kinds of things that you would use if you were especially working with difficult teams. You don't want to walk into that blindly. So that could help you with that. Okay.
Great. Okay, so unfortunately we are out of time, so I'm going to go ahead and put an email address for everyone. You can go ahead and send any other questions that you might have to that email address. Anything that has been submitted this far, we will go ahead and respond to. And like I said before, we will be sending out an email with a link to the recording, a copy of the slides, and a couple of the other resources that were mentioned. So thank you so much, Gail, for presenting this today. This is great information. And thank you, everyone, for joining us. And have a great rest of your week.
Yeah, and really, I just am so impressed with all of these questions that people have and comments that people have added. This really makes it so much more interesting for me. And as you can probably see, I could talk about this all day. So thank you so much. I'm really happy I got to share this. Thank you to the Myers-Briggs company for allowing me to do this, and Caitlin and everybody there's a huge team that has supported me in this, and I really, really appreciate it. So thank you all.
Yeah, great. Thanks, everyone.